So, we are going to talk today about probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest management books ever written. Whether you agree or disagree with it, you can't disagree with the influence that this book has had. Frederick Taylor is generally considered the father of modern management. The first time I read this, that was before I read Mary Parker Follett, but the first time I read this, I just thought, oh my God, wow, this is so cool. I just couldn't get over it. So, before I get into the book itself, does anyone have any questions from the last couple times Mary Parker Follett that you want to go over? Nothing sticks? So you kind of have just a little bit of a taste of what's going to be in here, because Mary Parker Follett also discussed Taylor a little bit already. So I actually had debated doing my doctoral thesis on Taylor, because I like the book that much. I've read dozens of articles on him. You're going to get, so for lecture A next time we'll finish this book, and then for lecture B you've got some other kind of supplements. And you kind of see how Taylorism actually developed in France and in the Soviet Union.
What stopped you from doing your tutorial on it?
What's that?
What stopped you from doing it on it?
That's a good question.
You found Mary.
You found Mary?
Well, before I found her, right, as you're going to read in our Michelin article, talking about how Taylorism did not get successfully applied in France, the French hate Taylor. I mean, to say that you like Taylor or Taylorism is basically the equivalent of saying you worship the devil. I mean, people are like really offended. Like, really offended. And you know, Taylor's been dead since like 1915, and people are still mad. It's the weirdest thing. He actually built a library in Paris for like Taylorism and innovation, trying to spread his ideas. They burned the library down in the 1930s. I mean, that's how much they hated everything about this man. Because you have to remember, that culture really thrives on individuality and a lack of respect for authority, and kind of that rule of thumb. That's kind of the French way. So, you know, for someone like Taylor to come in, and he didn't do a lot of actual management, hands-on management consulting even in France. It was brought to France by Michelin. Okay, but as you're going to read about it, it wasn't all that successful. And so people really hate him. And I mean, there was one professor, he was so mad at me that he wouldn't even speak to me. He'd actually turn his back anytime I got here. I mean, I really had said something offensive to people. I mean, hopefully none of you guys are that offended by this book. I mean, there's some kind of bad stuff in here, but nothing. You know, this really upset people. So I realized I wasn't going to find an advisor if I did my thesis.
Yeah.
I might be kicked out of the school, possibly. So I had to stop. But there's just what a neat thing. This book, that's stories and it's neat, but this book is pretty cool. So what I thought I'd do is, even though I like what Taylor's done here and everything, he's actually not the father of scientific management, if you want to be technical. He's just the one that made it popular. So we're going to talk about actually how this has kind of evolved. Okay, there's actually another guy that I think probably deserves the credit a little bit more. We'll talk a little bit about who is Taylor, what you know about him and stuff, and then we'll kind of shimmy to principles of scientific management. So right now, we are now shifting into operations. Okay? We're going to do a whole unit here. We're going to look at Taylor, how it didn't work in Soviet Union and in France. Then we'll kind of shift into the modern day evolution of Taylorism, which is Lean Six Sigma. And then we actually kind of start in the course, moving on to some other kind of miscellaneous topics that can kind of really apply to any level of analysis. So, anyone know who this gentleman is? Maybe. Close, sort of.
You've got a cotton gin and a rifle.
It's something to do with bullet. So first of all, good job on knowing the cotton gin. Because most people wouldn't know what that is just looking at it. So I'm impressed there. This is Eli Whitney. Has anybody heard of him?
Eli what?
Whitney. W-H-I-T-N-E-Y. And some people would disagree, but my opinion is Eli Whitney really is the father of scientific management. He's the one that kind of came up with these ideas, right? So his first invention, which you're going to kind of think about Taylor, think about how firearms were made back in the frontier days, right? A gunsmith made every firearm custom just for you. You know, check your arm and all that kind of stuff, and then you get a firearm, right? And you're out in the frontier, and your trigger well breaks. What do? You got to go to a gunsmith and get a whole new firearm made for you. I mean, that's a timely process, that's a costly process. You got to get the gunsmith, I mean, you got to do the whole thing. This is a real big deal when something breaks. Or if the rifle gets, I don't know, maybe if you watch Last of the Mohicans and you jump off the cliff and you land on a rock and the barrel gets compressed or something, man, you got to get a new barrel made. And that's going to be a big custom endeavor. That's not easy. So Eli Whitney had this idea. He said, you know what, that doesn't make any sense at all. That's ridiculous. That's just crazy. So what if we had parts for firearms that were interchangeable? So when I make the flintlock for a firearm, why don't I make all the flintlock for the firearms the same? And so if your flintlock breaks, you just get, you just have some spares and you just put it on there. Wow, you don't have to go to a gunsmith anymore. And gunsmiths would have access to common barrels, so that one barrel would fit on another rifle. Okay? So the parts are interchangeable. And we think that's pretty ordinary today, right? But that was a big deal back then. I mean, interchangeable parts, things that were the same and standardized? Whoa.
Good for you.
Yeah, great for war, unfortunately. Then he also came up with a cotton gin. Okay? Now, a cotton gin's a big deal for a couple of reasons. Remember, manufacturing in America predominantly took place near rivers, because you need a river to turn a water wheel, to turn everything going on inside the factory. The cotton gin, by the way, you guys understand what know what a cotton gin is? A cotton gin is a device where you can, have you ever seen like cotton on a plant?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got seeds in it. And it's like really painful picking the seeds out because they got the thorn, it's awful, okay? So you could have like a dozen people working on picking out seeds. Or you could have one or two people on one of these cotton gins. You put the, thing comes out of this end. You put the stuff in, a guy's turning the crank, and it's tearing the seeds out and separating them from the fibers the whole time. So the work of one or two people equals what might have been 20 people before.
You say he invented it?
It's hard to say exactly who invented it, but he's generally credited with inventing it. It's kind of like one of my colleagues who asked me who was the first entrepreneur. And I didn't have much of an answer for her. But she told me maybe if I studied a little harder, I'd know. So, what can you say, right? So, anyhow, he's generally credited with inventing it, though. Now, this is a really big deal, though, right? Because it started setting up rudimentary assembly lines away from water, in the South, which is predominantly rural at that time. It's before the Civil War. Okay? And it started adding a value to labor. So, in my opinion, it really was Eli Whitney, not Frederick Taylor, for these reasons. And you think about that. Mechanizing of labor and standardization of parts. Kind of has that hint of Taylor, doesn't it? So, who is this man? Well, it's Taylor, but yeah, what do we know about him? What's his occupation?
Did he manage factory?
It's one of his occupations, yeah, busted. You guys know anything about his history? So he managed a factory, but was he a manager? Did he go to management school?
No, he worked his way up.
Right. And what was his academic training? You can look at his title, by Frederick Taylor, and it tells you. Let's see if change that version. Yeah.
M-E-S-C-E.
Yeah, he's an engineer. Yeah. So you have to think about this.
Oh.
You go back far enough in the history of management, people didn't study management. It didn't exist as a discipline. Okay. So all of your managers were basically trained in mechanical engineering. That was their academic background. And so it's Taylor was as well. Okay. He was originally supposed to study law, and he claimed his vision was too bad he couldn't see, but he could somehow manage to pass engineering school, right? Evidently, he was a professional tennis player too, a pretty good one. But that's not talked about in this book. Okay, as you mentioned, he's a weird guy. People didn't like him. In fact, he had to die for his ideas to actually start taking hold, because his presentation of the ideas was so bad that people didn't want to have anything to do with it. I mean, that's the problem. And you see the way he talks to people. I mean, it's awful. It's just awful. But he does have some good ideas, by the way. Okay. Anything else we know about Taylor? When did he die?
You said 1915.
Oh, yep. Yeah. He died in 1915, right? So this book was compiled in 1911. The experiments that occurred, roughly 10, 15 years before. Right? So, this isn't exactly like he did this stuff and then he wrote about it right away. That's really not what it is. It's kind of his recollection of things that had kind of occurred. He wrote another book also called Principles of Shop Management. Okay? And that talks about how functional foremen and that kind of stuff come about. But we're going to talk more about that in our article on the Soviet Union, because I think that shows a really good application of it. So, yeah. So far, so good. Any questions? Yeah, I like the fact that you said this, Tammy. He worked his way up. Okay? He was somebody, and he always said he knew what the laborers were up to because he'd been one. Right?
Yes, but he also had enough of an education to be able to start experimenting where he worked and have them back him up against the workers. Because the workers tried to overthrow him.
That's right, they did. Yeah. He came from actually a privileged family. He was not a poor man at all. He came from a privileged background who started the mob. It's kind of an interesting background. And it also attributes in some ways to the way he behaves. Anyone know what this is?
Horn?
What's that?
Horn?
No.
Pig iron?
Make bullets.
He spent enough time with it.
You are on fire. Yeah, this is pig iron. So if you're reading Taylor, you think, what the world's pig iron? Well, this is what it is. It's this kind of wrought iron that's maybe in ingots, but hasn't really been formed into much.
So why are you showing that? Just so we know what pig iron is?
Just so you know what it looks like. I mean, when I read the book, I kept thinking, now, what in the world is pig iron?
He keeps talking about how they have to move the pig iron from these big piles onto these train cars. And so it was the introductory kind of illustration he gave for his whole theory was, how to get these guys to efficiently move this onto the train.
Okay, this is a lathe. Okay, we use to press and flatten things out, for example.
What was the user? What's that called?
A lathe.
It's in the bottom. Oh.
So he references it a lot. I mean, again, not having a mechanical engineering background, when I read this book, I had no visualization whatsoever what a lathe was. I mean, I got the impression things were being pulled, but I just really wasn't sure. Same thing with pig iron. No idea. So that's why I put the pictures in there. Okay. So, before we start, let me ask you guys a question. How far did you guys get in the book?
Probably second page.
I'm a few pages from the end and starting to get into formulas and stuff like that.
Don't worry about it. That's
She's
not.
really the only one who
Okay. So let's go ahead and take this one down by the numbers. So, ontologically, Taylor would probably assume something like an undifferentiated individual ontology, right? Because he assumes there's one right way to do something. And there is a one best way. And that's what he is exploring. What is the one best way to accomplish a task?
Undifferentiated.
Undifferentiated individual. So that's a big O with little ones underneath. Let me draw it out.
Oh, the God and his disciples.
Big O.
Yeah.
Bunch of O's.
Okay? So that's the whole point of this book, is figuring out the one best way. Now this is kind of an interesting contrast to Mary Parker Falk, isn't it? Where, in many ways, she's talking about, yeah, there might be a one best way, sort of, but we kind of figure it out together, and it's something that's always changing. I mean, Taylor admits there's change, right? Because we can learn from workers and we can adapt and those kinds of things. But, you know, the scientific manager is the one who knows. I mean, it's kind of, you guys ever read Thomas Hobbes? You guys know who he is? The Leviathan, his famous book. So life is nasty, brutish, and short. He basically said that the common people of England were just stupid and barbarians and needed kings in order to just keep them from killing each other. Okay. So it's kind of a Hobbesian view of mankind. I mean, a bunch of animals, and you need a scientific manager with his little stopwatch to time you, to tell you what to do, because you just can't figure it out yourself. I mean, that's basically what he's looking at. Yeah. This is Theory X at its finest. So far, so good. Interestingly enough, I forgot where I was in a museum, and they were talking about before Taylor came along, you know, people didn't even really use watches. Right?
Didn't they use like the sun back then to tell
I mean,
time?
yeah,
Kinda
but I
like
mean,
it's
time didn't have a
like-
real meaning. I mean, you know, hey, I'll see you tomorrow at some time. It's kind of like waiting for the cable guy. You know, I'll see you sometime between 9 to 5. You know. But you know, I guess women wore watches sometimes, right? But it was Taylor that really kind of put watches in the hands of men. Wow, a man can keep time too, and a man can show up to work on time and manage people by time, right?
And
So
see
you're-
how much he's making per hour.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of a side cultural note. So far so good. So we talked about the ontology. So this will be kind of the one thing that we'll talk about in terms of, you know, kind of as a group. What's this conservation of efficiency and kind of effort? What's he saying here? It kind of starts in the first couple pages. What is this?
The national efficiency
Yeah, help me out, Seth.
are less visible and less tangible, but vaguely appreciated.
What else is he talking about? What does that mean?
Are they talking natural works?
What's that?
Or natural resources?
Well, yeah, that's part of it, right? There's an interesting kind of environmentalist perspective to it, right? Yeah, so if, you know, our resources are being drained. Okay, great. I mean, not great, but you got it right. I mean, so what do we do about that?
Conserve them, use them efficiently.
Yeah, and how do we do that?
By setting them off to the side.
Anyway, close. How do we conserve? All right, Taylor. Taylor's got the solution. What is it?
Have more workers.
What's that?
Have more workers preserve natural resources.
Warming up? Maybe think about it more holistically from, what is Taylor's message?
Train.
Ah, tell me more. Train people. In what?
Train them in the job that you want them to do so they're more efficient.
Yeah. So through good training, we can be more efficient, and we can use our resources more efficiently, pardon me, right? That's kind of for everybody's benefit, right? I love this. We see our forests vanishing, our water powers going to waste, our soil being carried by floods into the sea, the end of our coal and our iron is in sight. Oh my goodness. But our larger waste of human effort, which go on every day through such our acts, are as blundering, ill-directed, or inefficient, and which Mr. Roosevelt refers to as a lack of national efficiency, are less visible, less tangible, and are but vaguely appreciated. So we as people, as producers, we're kind of wasting everything. That's a big part of the problem, right? Okay. And then it kind of expands, right? He he talks about it a little more. We can see and feel the waste of material things, awkward, inefficient, or ill-directed movements of men. However, leave nothing visible or tangible behind them. Their appreciation calls for an active memory, an effort of the imagination. And for this reason, even though our daily loss from this source is greater than the waste of material things, the one has stirred us deeply while the other has moved us but little. What's he saying there? I'm looking at, and these don't have page numbers on them?
No, I noticed that.
Yeah, somehow, that's the way.
Top of the second page.
Printed out.
Yeah.
It's not on mine.
It's not printed, it's just not on there, because I have that.
Oh, mine it's got pages. Yeah, all right, Mike, you want to help out?
I'll take a stab at it. Is he saying that if like a manager like mismanages something, that's like intangible, like you can't really measure it, but that's where the source of the problem.
Yeah.
That's where it's coming from.
We can't see it, but my goodness, this is a big deal. This is an issue, and this is something we need to pay attention to.
That's where the source is, like you mentioned before, that's where the sources are getting wasted.
Yeah, it's our inability, and he breaks it all the way down. It's not just people wasting time, it's wasting movements. Whew. Sends shivers down your spine, right? Okay. So, then he kind of continues, we want competent men, but we want someone else to have trained them. And it is only when we realize that our duty, as well as our opportunity, lies in systematically cooperating to train and to make this competent man, instead of in hunting for a man whom someone else has trained, that he shall be on the road to national efficiency. So what does he say here? What does he mean?
That you're not going to just pluck these people that are perfectly trained for you. You have to find these people and train them yourself.
That's right. So a big part of the manager's job is, of course, training and teaching. Interesting that Mary Parker Follett says the exact same thing, isn't it? But the application is drastically different, right? Mary Parker Follett is about, picking you up and helping you, and Taylor is, I'm going to show you because I know the way. Very different approaches, right? You can kind of see why Taylor is frequently called the father of modern management, and Mary Parker Follett is called the mother of modern management. However, I don't think they were married. In fact, I don't think they would have even gotten along at all, right? So, he kind of gives his research question on the same page, right? So why do we do this? What's the point of this book? And he says, well, first, to point out through a series of simple illustrations the great loss which the whole country is suffering through inefficiency in almost our daily acts. Second, to try to convince the reader that the remedy of this inefficiency lies in systematic management rather than searching for some unusual or extraordinary man. That's kind of a big statement, isn't it? And third, to prove that the best management is a true science, resting upon clearly defined laws, rules, and principles as a foundation, and further to show that the fundamental principles of scientific management are applicable to all kinds of human activities, from our simplest individual acts to the work of our great cooperations, which call for the most elaborate cooperation. And, briefly, through a series of illustrations to convince the reader that whenever these principles are correctly applied, results must follow, which are truly astounding. So these are our three kind of points from the book. So, captains of industry.
They are born, not made.
What's that?
Are born, not
Why do
made.
you say that, Cindy? Do you say that, or does Taylor say
No,
that?
it says right here, captains of industries are born, not made.
Read that portion to me.
The entire sentence or just that?
Yeah, that's the entire sentence.
In the past, the prevailing idea has been well expressed in saying that captains of industry are born, not made.
What do you think about that?
That's not true.
Why not?
You gotta be trained. You're not. I mean, by being trained, you can be the best captain, but you still need to get trained. You're not just born with knowing what to do.
Let's look a little bit more holistically what Taylor's saying too.
He says that
This-
they have to be born right and they have to be trained well in order for them to compete with an ordinary man who was just trained well, not born well.
Yeah, well, he's saying
Elaborate
this
on
is
this.
the
He
old,
says it right after.
yeah, right,
That's
he's saying this is the
old
old idea, right?
Yeah.
So he's kind of getting the point. Like he says that, okay, well, here's a statement, but then, wait a second, this is what it actually meant.
That's right. And this is how I'm different from everybody else, right? You have to actually train people. Big emphasis on training, not the special trained man.
Okay.
So what's this deal with maximum prosperity? What's he talking about here? Maximum prosperity.
To develop every branch of the business to its highest state of excellence.
Yeah, and not just the highest state of business, but also something else.
Training and development.
And for the employee.
Yeah, that's right. So the employee, okay, not only gets higher wages than are usually received by men of his class, but more important still, the development of each man to a state of maximum efficiency, so they may be able to, generally speaking, the highest grade of work for which his natural abilities fit him, and further means giving him, when possible, this class of work to do. Huh.
Pushing things to their maximum
Yeah.
capacity, capability.
And when you push people to their best, then you can also give them kind of work that they're more suited for. But see, it's not just about giving maximum prosperity to the worker, is it? There's something else that he says, right?
Maximum prosperity
Yeah, for whom?
for the employees,
Yes, the employees, yeah.
so that the prosperity may be permanent,
Yeah. And also maximum prosperity for the employer.
and also,
Right.
and, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's an important thing. Okay. Now, it's an interesting idea that Taylor brings up, and this is how Taylor differentiates himself from other thinkers at the time, right? There were other people at that time, right, contemporaries of Taylor, who believed that it's kind of a socially responsible thing to do. You should share your profits with your workers, right? But just share it with the workers, almost like a CSR kind of thing, a corporate social responsibility, right? Just give money. You know, they are contributing to the organization, they should receive some sort of a contribution.
Bonus.
Sounds kind of like Marx, doesn't it? Right? Now, Taylor has deviated from that, and it's almost a CSV perspective, right? We should train them so that they can pick themselves up and they can produce the maximum for us and for themselves. I mean, he doesn't say it outright, but the last couple of paragraphs we just talked about almost hinted something like a development of spirit in some way, right? Mary Parker Fall built on this too, though. Do you remember that? She talks about one of the reasons to work is for kind of personal or self-development. Right? So far, so good? So, baseball and work. What do you guys think about this discussion? Let's see. I'll have to count the pages.
Um,
Think about the pages not being.
Front and back.
It's kind of like the fourth page, I guess.
Well, we started on this one to be page one, so we can just number
Yeah, I'm
them.
going to start marking them down.
So they'll just page one.
Oh, you know, there's an easier way to do this. I forgot I pulled it up on the screen so that we could follow along easier. This should be a little bit easier, I hope. Fortunately, it's on page 1 of 1. The entire document's one page according to the Internet Explorer, so there you go. Okay?
Is it before chapter 2?
Yeah.
Chapter 1.
Or
It's the next
Oh,
page.
actually,
It's actually the next page.
yeah.
Or chapter 1, yeah. Okay, so, I mean, this is there's a couple interesting ideas. So we talk about maximum prosperity, right? Now, he continues on a little bit, and he says, first of all, he's already kind of hinting that workers and employers don't necessarily have to have antagonistic interests. And again, there's an important historical context behind that, right? That was a time when labor unions were very much against management. You have to remember this is, there's a degree of communist agitation going on in the world at this time. There's labor strikes going on all the time. He's probably also referencing loosely, do you guys know the Pullman strike? The Pullman strike is kind of a black eye in our history that we don't like to talk about. Pullman was a company that made railway cars, right? And they had a town for all the Pullman workers. They had a school, had a library, dormitories, the whole thing. So Pullman had a little bit of an economic issue, so they raised the rent in the Pullman town, but they didn't raise wages. So the workers went on strike. The president of Pullman wound up wiring the president. They sent the cavalry in, United States Army cavalry, and they massacred the workers. Okay, and there were several incidences that happened like this. So, when Taylor's writing this, he's very much cognizant of the context at that time. Okay? It was okay to send the army in to slaughter striking workers. So he's saying, maybe that's not necessary. Maybe we don't have to have antagonistic relationships. So, I love this. These principles appear to be so self-evident that many men may think it is almost childish to state them. Let us, however, turn to the facts as they actually exist in this country and England. The English and American peoples are the greatest sportsmen in the world. Whenever an American workman plays baseball or an English workman plays cricket, it is safe to say that he strains every nerve to secure victory of his side. He does his very best to make the largest possible number of runs. The universal sentiment is so strong that any man who fails to give out all there is in him in the sport is branded as a quitter and treated with contempt by those around him. And then, of course, he says, the same workman returns to work the following day, instead using every effort to turn out the largest amount possible work. In a majority of cases, this man deliberately plans to do as little as he safely can to turn out far less work than he is well able to do in many instances, and not even do 1/3 to 1/2 of a proper day's work. Things really haven't changed all that much, have they? And in fact, if he were able to do his best to turn out his largest possible day's work, he'd be abused by his fellow workers for so doing. Even more so if he'd proved himself a quitter in sport. Underworking, that is, deliberately working slowly so as to avoid a full day's work. Soldiering, as it is called in this country. Hanging out, as it is called in England. Kakane, I don't know if that's how you say it, as it is in Scotland. It's almost universal industrial establishments and prevails to a large extent in building trades. And the writer asserts without fear of contradiction that this constitutes the greatest evil with which the working people of both England and America are now afflicted. What do you think about those statements?
He's pretty sure of himself.
It could be true.
Yeah,
It is true.
It is true.
things haven't really changed all that much in the past, 105 years, have they?
If you enjoy your job, you'll put out the effort. If you don't, it's just a regular 9-to-5 job.
Yeah.
Even if you enjoy your job, you just do what you need to do, like the bare minimum.
Yeah, because then if you do too much, then they'll expect that. And now you have to do that every day.
But he's confident that your fellow workers will be upset with you if you make them look bad or
Oh,
you
that is
try
a
to
good
make
point. Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
That is true too.
Unless you actually save them, like that's supposed like Gladys did more work than me, and I'm looking at her like, why don't you just save my ass from getting fired? So it's like, because that covered up for my work, my mistake, so it could go either way.
Now, in Taylor's case, he's right. I mean, you guys may have not have gotten this part of the book yet, but you remember that part where the Taylor-trained workers move to a different organization and they're shoveling hard. The other workers say they're going to beat the crap out of them if they continue that, and they need to take it easy like they are. So
then they end up making less money, even though they're making more per hour, was it, or per pound or something?
They were actually So they actually had to go back.
No, they wanted to go back.
No, they did. Remember?
Yeah.
They said, "You're welcome back. Come back. We're happy to have you back." I mean, isn't that nuts? Right? Now, Mary Parker Fuller hints at this too, in a way, right? Remember, she talks about making work and play kind of natural, the multifaceted side. And I gave you that example of the total person, right? So, again, A mother would be a good person to ask if a toy is a good thing for a child, right? Because she would kind of know. Whereas making a mother put lead paint in a toy probably would be more disagreeable. She might actually soldier in that case, right? So yeah, doing too much in work is bad. Doing too little in sport is bad. And I love the example of soldiering. You know, from personal experience, if you're never, you can always kind of snoop around. You can always find soldiers sleeping, you know, like under a vehicle, or you know, you just never quite know what they're gonna do, right? A lot of sleeping, actually. So yeah, definitely remind me. So yeah, I love this example. Okay. So far, so good. Let's see what our next item is. I love Taylor. I can't help it. Okay, so he talks about a couple more things here. So, you know, scientific management is perceived as not all that great. And he's going to say, you know what, let's stamp those rumors out right now. Okay, but let's talk about what those rumors are first, right? Does scientific management promote unemployment or not? People say, oh my God, you know, Noel, now you're doing the work of 50 people. That means 49 people are going to get laid off. Thanks a lot. You should have soldiered.
No.
Did you promote unemployment? Why not?
Well, production is just going to increase. They're just going to have a larger output.
Yeah. So then there's a larger output and there's more money.
Well, and he even said if you didn't do well at that job, there was probably another job within the same company that you would do better at.
Yeah, that's right. Let me just talk about something that I didn't mention so much in the beginning, right? The influence of this book is huge. The Soviet Union and Japan both based their manufacturing systems based on Taylor. And that very concept that you just mentioned, Tammy, that idea that if you're not any good in this job, don't worry, there's something for you within the company. You know, in Japan, you get lifetime employment with the same company. And if you're terrible, you take another position in there. I had a friend working for a Korean company, and as a consultant. And they have like this kind of paramilitary thing going for the management trainees, and they're running laps and doing jumping jacks and the mass games and all stuff. And there's a loudspeaker, and it's saying, if you fail, you will be put on the assembly line. Not you will be fired, you will be put on the assembly line. And in the Soviet Union, they had the same approach. What's the translation? Everyone has their duty in the fulfillment of the socialist task, I think would be the best translation of that. So you may not be good at a factory worker because you got little arms and you can't swing that hammer. Don't worry, we've got a job in the back office just for you.
But wouldn't that anger other employees that are working their way hard for that promotion? Like, let's suppose that Noel can fit into that supervising job much better than working at the, you know, hitting the hammers or something. And so he gets that job. And then the person that's actually working hard for that job, that's hoping for a promotion, doesn't get it.
No, it's not necessarily a promotion,
Yeah,
it's just
just
a
something more
different
something
job.
better
more,
suited
yeah.
for it, right? Yeah, it's not mess up, move up. No.
Mess up move
Mess
up.
up.
I like that.
Something that happened a lot. Something that happened an awful lot when I was in the Army.
Mess up move up.
Yeah, I don't know if that's an industry term too or not, but it was an Army term, that's for sure. Yeah, mess up, move up. So the idea was that you could get promoted to a higher level of analysis within the organization. When you look at very large corporations, you notice that at the bottom, when you start talking about functional staff like human resources or operations, at the lowest level of the organization, actually you have a wide variety of tasks that you have to pay attention to. Whereas when you move up higher in the organization, people become more and more specialized. And so sometimes it's seen as kind of easier. So you can put in competent people actually at a higher level. They may not become CEOs or executives, but they may be assistant to that person, and they can focus on a more narrow task that they're actually able to handle. So yeah, it's a promotion, but it's more specialized. But again, Taylor kind of taught, Taylor would probably support something like that, right? So yeah, so the unemployment. Tammy, do you remember the example about the shoes that he gives?
Oh, yeah.
Let's see if I can find it.
The cheapening of an article. Yeah, it's the next page after the baseball page.
So when he's, we're starting to talk about, let's see, there's another example here that I thought was interesting. Yeah, there we go.
There it is, the cheapening, see where it
Yeah.
says? Yeah.
Cheapening of any article in common use almost immediately results in a largely increased demand for that article. Take the case of shoes, for instance. The introduction of machinery for doing every element of the work, which was formerly done by hand, resulted in making shoes at a fraction of the labor cost, and selling them so cheap now that almost every man, woman, and child in the working classes buys 1 or 2 pairs of shoes per year, and wears shoes all the time, whereas formerly each workman bought perhaps 1 pair of shoes every 5 years, and went barefoot most of the time, wearing shoes only as a luxury or as a matter of the sternest necessity. So in spite of this enormous increase of shoes per workman, which has come from shoe machinery, the demand for shoes has also increased, so there's relatively more men working in the shoe industry than ever before. So back to Taylor's original statement. Does scientific management promote employment? No, because now we're buying more shoes because shoes are cheaper, and now more people are employed making shoes. So this is great for everybody. We all have more shoes, we have more jobs, and we're paid more. Bam. Soldiering to protect interests. What's going on here?
Some workers could fake that they're doing the work like longer, but you finish it on time. Say that they still have work to do.
Does he try to hint at it as being selfish? Like, they do it just for their own, like, benefit, but they're not thinking of society or everybody else in the company.
Yeah.
He argues that like the wrong form of management is in place, and that's why people are sold through.
So they always want to take it easy, and that's why he sold it. Now it's an interesting thing when we'll see in the articles for after spring break with Soviet Union. I mean, that was how a lot of Soviet manufacturing was done, right? Kind of fool around for 8 months out of the year, and then working really, really hard the last 4 months to make quota. Okay. So it's kind of an unfortunate application. Now what's this rule of thumb thing? Rule of thumb.
That's the old way.
Yeah. What does that mean, the old way?
It's the way the worker has developed his job. And he's the one who knows the best way to do it because he's the one who does it all the time.
Yeah. That's the way we do things around here. Right? That's the rule of thumb. That's what he's fighting against. Okay? Who knows how to design the task the best? It's the scientific manager. I mean, he gets consultation with the worker, but he designs it. In French, there's this word artisanal, which is like kind of homemade or rule of thumb. And again, this is an example why it fails in France, the scientific management, because that's valued so much. I mean, you would go to a fair and you'd see something, and it didn't even look that great, but it was artistic. This is something you want. It was always a selling point. I didn't understand why something that was non-standardized and probably not functional was attractive just because it was like homemade. So that was kind of weird. But that's what Taylor's fighting against. Not the rule of thumb, but rather the standardization of practice. And again, we think about it as, yeah, that's obvious, right? But you have to remember that in the context of Taylor's thinking, this is a big deal. I mean, this is a really big deal. So, this piecework thing, what's going on here?
Oh, it's a way of reimbursing them for their work.
Yeah, and how does that work exactly? Let me pull it up on the screen, sorry. Okay. So let's talk about this paragraph here because I think it's particularly good. It is, however, so by the way, piecework, you're paid by the piece, right?
Yes.
And again, looking at the historical context, and I emphasize historical context over and over and over, because the audience that Taylor is writing about, they were surrounded by this stuff all the time. We're fortunately 105 years removed from this, so that's why I kind of emphasize it. Before large-scale industrialization, piecework was how workers were paid. Okay, when you think about England in the 1500s, that's kind of when the Industrial Revolution kind of has its early inklings, right? How did it happen? Where there weren't really factories in it, right? You got a bunch of farmers in England during the winter. What do you think farmers in England in the winter do?
Knit.
What?
Knit.
Yeah, well then, yeah, so originally they did nothing much, but then it starts turning into knitting, right? So, what does that mean? So, you have a merchant, and he wanders around the British countryside in a little wagon with a bunch of stuff in the back. And he'll say, you know what?
Bless you. Thank you.
You're a farmer. You're bored. Would you like to make some money? And of course, the answer is always yes, because people are barely, like, not starving to death then. Hey, take some wool, and if you can spin it into yarn, I'll pay you by the piece. And they take the yarn, and you go to the next village and say, hey, take this yarn, you knit a sweater, or a cloak, or a rug, or a blanket, whatever. I'll give you money per piece. And that's kind of how the Industrial Revolution actually started. Okay, the merchants taking stuff from point A to point B with these farmers, working in the wind. So that's what he's talking about, this piecemeal, right? But the problem is, it sounds like people would be motivated, right, out of the piecemeal or piecework, right? Sounds like it, because you get paid for how much you work. No, he says. It is, however, under piecework that the systematic soldiering, the art of systematic soldiering, is thoroughly developed. After a workman has had the price per piece of the work he is doing lowered 2 or 3 times as a result of his having worked harder and increased his output, he is likely entirely to lose sight of his employer's side of the case and become imbued with a grim determination to have no more cuts if soldiering can prevent it. Unfortunately for the character of the workman, soldiering involves a deliberate attempt to mislead and deceive his employer, and thus upright and straightforward workmen are compelled to become more or less hypocritical. The employer is soon looked upon as an antagonist, if not an enemy, and the mutual confidence which exists between a leader and his men, the enthusiasm and the feeling they are all working with the same end, will share in the results is entirely lacking. Cindy, you said it very well before. You work hard, you get dumped on more stuff, and then you get paid less for the extra work that you're doing, so then you slack off. And so no matter how bright-eyed and bushy-tailed you are when you start your new job, you're not going to want to do that job anymore after too long, right? So, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but what is Taylor's solution to this piecework problem? The worker decides how many pieces he'll produce in a day. What does Taylor say?
There's a way to figure out what the best number of pieces to
That's right.
make in a day are.
By managing the task scientifically, by dictating every single movement, micromanaging if it were, you can determine how many pieces should be produced in a day. So there's no piecemeal work at all. I'll tell you how much to produce in a day. So everybody produces that amount in a day.
I think he says somewhere in here where he's like scientific management should be like fully 1/2 of the problem of the management. So it's like half of them. It's up to management to take care of the problem, or it's like half of their duty. Or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a manager is designed to do. They are coaches, they are trainers, they are task designers. And that's his whole kind of thesis for work. Yeah. So far, so good. So let's shift gears and see what we got over here. Okay. Responsibilities of management and labor. Mike, you talked about this, right? A big part of management's responsibilities, again, is the designing of tasks, supervision. But what are some of the things that we talk about here? What are the responsibilities of the laborer? It's great, management has responsibilities. They're responsible, right? What does the laborer have to do in return? Well, yeah, that's part of it, right? What else do we know?
And learn on their own how to do the task or supervised and efficiently.
That's one of the beautiful things about scientific management. And Mary Parker Follett talks about it, but again from a very different angle. Okay? Whereas Mary Parker Follett talks about us being loyal to a situation, Taylor talks about almost being loyal to a task or a timeline or something like this, right? So in some way the manager is not actually managing. The manager is the one kind of helping you discover, whereas Mary Parker Follett is more of a creation kind of thing, helping you discover that one best way. And then you kind of adhere to that, so the manager's not always looking at you, right? And you can do this in your own professional lives, right? If you have an employee and they say, hey, you think maybe they're not working too much, you can watch them a little bit and say, you don't have to like scare them by staring over their shoulder, but you can, in a very friendly way. This is kind of what Taylor intended, but Taylor's personality wouldn't really allow it. Hey, can you tell me what you do? How do you do all that stuff, right? You just kind of watch. Right? That's what Taylor's doing, right? Just watching. Of course, I wouldn't recommend you use a stopwatch following people around there, terrified of today's circumstance, right? But you can kind of keep a mental note of the time that's going. How do you do that? Why do you do that? In a very kind of a friendly, inconspicuous way. Then you start observing, well, how much time is actually being spent? Because they'll probably be working if you're kind of looking over their shoulder, not playing solitaire at work or Facebook. Yeah, it tells you my age. I don't think people play solitaire work anymore. They probably Facebook or whatever they're doing, right? But then at the end of the day, so wow, that was really great. You filled out 20 reports. Do you think we could do this as kind of a standard everyday kind of thing? Or, what if we just change that a little bit? Do you think we can up that to 25? Can you help me figure that out? And wow, it's 25. And then to an extent, you can kind of hold them accountable. You don't have to be a jerk like Taylor to pull this off.
That's true.
Right? The principles are good. Taylor is not.
He's decided they're stupid and he has to find a creative way to... and to some extent, Taylor might be right. You have to remember that a lot of these workers were extremely uneducated. They were not literate. Trying to fight alcoholism in the workplace at that time was probably an almost impossible task.
Probably like to micromanage.
Well, he micromanaged himself playing softball even as a kid. So yeah, the guy was a control freak. Yeah, he liked it too. But that doesn't mean it wasn't necessarily useful either. Right? Again, the nature of those tasks, hauling pig iron, shoveling coal, micromanaging might be important, right? Versus how do you do creatively with a customer?
Right.
So a lot of it deals with the nature of the task itself. Let's see. So we talked about management of labor. And again, one of the things that he's trying to fight here is that there doesn't necessarily need to be some sort of antagonistic relationship between management and labor. We're working towards the same thing. Okay? Again, Mary Parker Follett, she doesn't like Taylor, but in some ways there's some similarities in their thoughts, right? We're going to kind of figure out what's the best thing together. We just have kind of different responsibilities.
Yeah, he keeps using the word friendly and supportive.
Yeah. 100%. And that's really what he wasn't friendly and supportive. But he thinks
the
other people
manager should be, yes.
Yeah, exactly. A coach. And by the way, who really has mastered that friendly, supportive thing? It's the Japanese when they manage their factory floors. That foreman on a factory is a coach. It is somebody that you can bring up suggestions to. And they really got it down. I'm not sure the Soviets did, but the Japanese absolutely mastered it. So, strikes and labor unions, again, a lot of the stuff that he's writing about and why he addresses this is, again, because strikes were so prevalent back then, and they were violent, and it was bad. Okay, he's trying to say these antagonisms between management and labor, they're not necessary. Okay, we're all working on the same thing. And by the way, we can augment the laborer's standard of life through scientific management, through the sharing of profits, through increased productivity, so we don't have to worry about that. And as I check our time, a couple more points that I want to talk about. This one is so important. And this may be one of the, I can't say the most important point in the book, but one of the most important points in the book. The mechanism versus the essence of scientific management. And this is a thing that people did not understand about Taylor's words at the time and right after, and I would argue frequently that they still don't. Okay, so what is the mechanism of scientific management? Let's pull it up here. If I didn't paraphrase that word, but yeah, here.
Where are we? Oh, before chapter 2?
Let's read this passage out loud because I think it's extremely important. Okay, so several papers have been written describing the expedients which have been adopted in detail, which have been developed under scientific management, and the steps to be taken in changing from the ordinary to the scientific type. But unfortunately, most of the readers of these papers have mistaken the mechanisms for the true essence. Scientific management fundamentally consists of certain broad principles, a certain philosophy which can be applied in many ways, and a description of what any one man or men may believe to be the best mechanism for applying these general principles should in no way be confused with the principles themselves. I stomped 3 times because this is an extremely, extremely important point in the book. Do you guys understand what he means?
Not really.
Okay. So I'll tie it into something broader first, and then we'll kind of shimmy that. Remember Plato's theory of forms? There it is right there. Ask yourself, what is the form? Not what is the practice. Ask yourself, what is that generally agreed upon thing that we all say, yes, that's wonderful, not our specific interpretations of it. Does that make sense so far? So instead of arguing about whether a recliner or a stool is a form of chair, what if we agreed upon, you're sitting on something, isn't that a chair?
They're both chairs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bam, so you start there. Okay. Now, in many ways, Mary Parker Follett hints at these kinds of things too, right? Because the mechanism is where we disagree, and the essence is what we agree on. Okay, that's the whole point of integration, getting rid of the kind of divergent facts that aren't really all that relevant. Okay, so far so good? Now, let's take this a step further. Scientific management is seen as an orientation or a viewpoint. That's what he's trying to say. Scientific management is not following someone around with a stopwatch and harassing them. That's not what it is. It's kind of this general mentality that, we can manage a task and we can make people more efficient and we can help them share in this kind of pursuit of maximum prosperity and efficiency. How you do it, there's many, many techniques. You can use a stopwatch. You can train, you can coach, you can do it yourself. There's so many techniques available. Okay? Don't focus on the fact that you have a stopwatch and you're chasing somebody around. Okay? And that's what a lot of people did back then, especially after Taylor's death. Okay? People would say that they were managing scientifically because they were harassing somebody with a stopwatch. I mean, that's literally what happened. And guess what? They didn't do the profit sharing. They didn't explain anything. There was a lot of yelling and a lot of stopwatches. And obviously people resented that. Okay, so what he's saying is, those people, they missed the whole point of it.
Right, they got wrapped up in trying to find the fastest way to do it, but they kind of forgot about including the workers and the coaching and all the other parts of it.
Yeah. Mike?
He's saying there's so many factors involved, and it can just depend on so many things. Although, if you do scientific management, the periods that are good would be longer, positive from using it.
Yeah. And essence is a long-term thing, just like you mentioned, right? Okay, things change, the mechanisms change. Obviously, we'd use a stopwatch today, maybe it's an iPhone or whatever. But the point is the same, right? And I kind of think, remember I talked about Major Barney previously? So I remember, Lean Six Sigma is the modern day interpretation of Taylorism. We're going to talk about that in a couple lectures. And that was one of the things I did in the Army, was Lean Six Sigma, and I think it's awesome. Okay, well, we'll get a couple case studies from that later on. And so Major Barney would always